Blazing Saddles arrived in February 1974 and immediately broke every rule about what a Western could be, what a comedy could say, and how far a film could push an audience before it pushed back. 52 years later, the cast that made it possible tells a story that is as wide and unexpected as the film itself. Here is where they all ended up. Number 1, we have Cleavon Little as Bart, the new black sheriff of Rock Ridge, whose unflappable wit and complete refusal to be intimidated by the town that despised him made him one of the most quietly revolutionary comic heroes American cinema produced in the entire decade. 34 years old during production, he came to the role already carrying a Tony Award won in 1970 for his lead performance in the Broadway musical Purlie, a theatrical credential that gave his screen work a technical foundation most of his comedic contemporaries never had access to. The range between a Broadway stage and a dusty Western set was considerable, and he covered it without any visible adjustment in his bearing or confidence. His personal life included marriages and a daughter named Adia, though the details remained largely outside the public conversation across the years he was working. After Blazing Saddles, the career he deserved never fully materialized at the level the performance warranted, a gap between talent and opportunity that Hollywood has never adequately explained. Cleavon Little passed away on October 22, 1992, at 53 years old from colorectal cancer, far too early and far too quietly for someone who had delivered one of the era's most essential performances. Number 2, we have Gene Wilder as Jim, the Waco Kid, the fastest gun in the West, whose hands shake too badly to hold a drink, but whose friendship with Bart becomes the film's emotional core beneath all the chaos surrounding it. Born Jerry Silberman, he was 40 during production and brought a particular quality to the role that nobody else could have located. That combination of genuine sadness and sudden explosive comic timing that made Jim feel like a real person who had wandered into a Mel Brooks film and decided to stay anyway. His personal life moved through 4 marriages, ending with his marriage to Karen Webb in 1991, following the devastating loss of his third wife, Gilda Radner, to ovarian cancer in 1989, a grief he spoke about with consistent openness across the decades that followed. Young Frankenstein arrived the same year as Blazing Saddles, and the combination of those 2 films within 12 months established a creative peak very few comedic performers have ever matched in such a compressed window. He later wrote novels and children's books after stepping back from acting. Gene Wilder passed away on August 29, 2016, at 83 years old. Number 3, we have Harvey Korman as Hedley Lamar, the magnificently self-important villain whose fury at being repeatedly called Hetty instead of Hedsley somehow became funnier with each repetition, without ever losing its edge across the entire film. 46 years old during production, he was already one of the most recognized faces on American television through his long run on The Carol Burnett Show, a weekly platform that had been sharpening his instinct for comic escalation since 1967. The chemistry between his Hedley and Mel Brooks's Governor Lepetamain operated on a frequencies that only performers with complete mutual trust can find, and the results landed consistently across every scene they shared. His first marriage to Donna Credit from 1960 to 1977 produced 2 children, and he later married Christine Cerny in 1982, remaining with her until his death. The Carol Burnett Show reunion specials he participated in across the following decades confirmed that the audience's affection for him never diminished regardless of how much time passed between appearances. Harvey Korman passed away on May 29, 2008, at 81 years old. Number 4, we have Carol Arthur as Harriet Johnson, one of the Rock Ridge townspeople, whose presence in the ensemble gave the community scenes a domestic warmth that made the absurdity around it feel grounded in something recognizably human. Around 38 during production, she arrived as part of a creative world that was already deeply familiar to her through her marriage to comedian and actor Dom DeLuise, a partnership that began in 1965 and lasted until his death in 2009, across more than 4 decades of shared professional and personal life. They had 3 sons together, Peter, Michael, and David DeLuise, all of whom eventually found their own paths into the entertainment industry, making theirs one of the more quietly productive family legacies connected to anyone in this cast. Her screen appearances were selective across the years surrounding this film, reflecting someone whose engagement with the industry ran through her family connections as much as her individual career. Carol Arthur passed away on August 4, 2018, at 83 years old, on what would have been her birthday, a coincidence that felt entirely too cinematic for someone who spent her life around storytellers. Number 5, We have Slim Pickens as Taggart, the drawling, morally uncomplicated ranch foreman, whose enthusiasm for carrying out terrible plans made him one of the film's most consistently funny presences without ever requiring him to do anything more complicated than be exactly himself at full volume. Born Louis Burton Lindley Jr., he was around 54 during production and had spent decades as a genuine rodeo performer before Hollywood discovered that his natural physicality and thick Western authenticity were exactly what countless films needed in their supporting cast. His most iconic screen moment before Blazing Saddles had come 10 years earlier in Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove, where he rode a nuclear bomb toward its target with the cheerful confidence of a man who had never once second-guessed a single decision in his life. He married Margaret Ellis in 1949, and they had children together across a family life built largely outside the Hollywood spotlight his career required. Slim Pickens passed away on December 8, 1983, at 64 years old, leaving behind a screen presence so specific and so unrepeatable that the Western genre felt genuinely different without him in it. Number 6, we have Mel Brooks as Governor William J. Lepetomane, the spectacularly incompetent, enthusiastically distracted state governor, whose scenes confirmed that the man directing the chaos happening around him was also constitutionally incapable of staying out of the frame himself. Born Melvin Kaminsky, he was 47 during production and brought the governor to life with the gleeful commitment of someone who had written the character specifically to give himself the most fun possible while everyone else was doing the actual work. He turned 99 in 2026, making him one of the oldest living figures connected to any major Hollywood production of his era, a longevity that has allowed him to watch Blazing Saddles become a film school staple and a cultural landmark across 5 decades. His first marriage to Florence Baum ended in 1961, and he married actress Anne Bancroft in 1964, a partnership that became one of Hollywood's most warmly regarded until her death in 2005. His son Max Brooks, author of World War Z, represents the most publicly visible branch of a creative legacy that now extends across generations. The EGOT status he holds reflects a career that refused to stay inside any single medium. Number 7, we have Alex Karras as Mongo, the impossibly massive, cheerfully destructive, hired enforcer whose complete indifference to conventional logic gave the film one of its most quotable exchanges and whose physical presence made every scene he occupied feel immediately unpredictable. 38 years old during production, he arrived not from a traditional acting background, but from 9 seasons as a defensive tackle for the Detroit Lions, a professional football career that had made him one of the most recognized athletes in the sport before the cameras found him. His first marriage to Joan Jurgensen ended before his public profile expanded significantly, and he later married actress Susan Clark in 1980, a partnership that lasted until his death and produced a blended family they raised together. The role that brought him his widest television audience came as George Papadopoulos on Webster, a sitcom he anchored alongside Susan Clark from 1983 onward that ran for 7 seasons and confirmed he had fully completed the transition from athlete to working actor. Alex Karras passed away on October 10, 2012, at 77 years old. Number 8, we have Burton Gilliam as Lyle, the enthusiastic, deeply committed ranch hand whose scenes in the film's opening sequences establish the particular flavor of ignorance the story is about to spend the next 90 minutes dismantling. Born in Texas in 1936, he is 89 today, one of the oldest living members of this cast, and brought an authenticity to the role that came from the same place Slim Pickens drew on, a genuine, deep roots, Western background that no amount of acting training fully replicates. The Texas accent was not a performance choice, but simply what he sounded like. And director Mel Brooks understood exactly what that kind of specificity does to the texture of a scene that is operating on multiple comic frequencies simultaneously. His career across the decades following Blazing Saddles moved through various film and television appearances that consistently drew on the same qualities the film first put to use, a particular regional physicality and directness that casting directors return to across different productions for different reasons across a long working life. His personal life has stayed largely out of the public record throughout his career. Part 2, number 9, we have David Huddleston as Olson Johnson, the self-appointed spokesman for Rockridge, whose absolute certainty about his own importance made every town meeting feel like a formal occasion that nobody else had been notified about. Around 43 during production, he built a long and steady career across film and television that moved through westerns, comedies, and dramatic productions across 5 decades without ever anchoring itself to a single defining role until The Big Lebowski arrived in 1998 and gave him the title character, A wealthy eccentric whose passive authority operated on a completely different frequency from Olsen Johnson but required the same quality of settled, unearned confidence to work. The Coen brothers clearly understood what Mel Brooks had spotted 24 years earlier. He was married to Sarah Cuppa, and they had children together across a family life built largely outside the Hollywood conversation his career required him to participate in professionally. David Huddleston passed away on August 10, 2016, at 85 years old, leaving behind a filmography that rewarded anyone patient enough to follow it across its full length. Number 10, we have Madeline Kahn as Lily von Stupp, the world-weary, magnificently comic German showgirl, whose torchy musicals number and subsequent scenes with Cleavon Little produced one of the most genuinely surprising performances the film contained and earned her an Academy Award nomination that remains one of the more deserved in the Best Supporting Actress category's history. 29 years old during production, she arrived already building a reputation through Paper Moon that same year, boss, that placed her among the most exciting new comic performers in the industry. The back-to-back Oscar nominations for Paper Moon and Blazing Saddles across consecutive years confirmed this was not a fluke. Young Frankenstein came the same year as this film, meaning 1974 represented a creative concentration that most performers never reach across an entire career. She never married and had no children, a personal life that stayed largely outside the public conversation, while the professional one generated consistent acclaim and affection from audiences and colleagues alike. Madeline Kahn passed away on December 3, 1999, at 57 years old from ovarian cancer, a loss the comedy world absorbed without ever fully recovering from. Number 11, we have John Hillerman as Howard Johnson, one of the Johnson family townspeople whose clipped, precise delivery gave the Rock Ridge Ensemble its most self-consciously dignified presence and whose screen time in Blazing Saddles represents an early moment in a career that would eventually reach a far wider audience through a very different kind of role entirely. Around 41 during production, the role that introduced him to his largest and most sustained audience came nearly a decade later as Jonathan Quayle Higgins III on Magnum P.I., a character he inhabited, across 8 seasons from 1980 to 1988, and for which he won an Emmy Award that recognized the considerable technical achievement of a Texas-born actor, sustaining a British accent and bearing across hundreds of episodes without a single audible slip. He never married and largely kept his personal life outside the public record across the full span of his career, a privacy he maintained with complete consistency, regardless of how prominent his professional profile became. John Hillerman passed away on November 9, 2017, at 84 years old. Number 12, we have Liam Dunn as Reverend Johnson, the perpetually horrified man of God whose escalating outrage at the language surrounding him while delivering the most colorful sermon in fictional Western history made him one of the film's most reliably funny recurring presences across the town sequences. Around 56 during production, he brought the instincts of a seasoned character actor to a role that required perfect comic timing across material, that walked a very precise line between parody and genuine irreverence, and he never once misjudged where that line was. His career had moved through television and film appearances across the preceding decades, and Mel Brooks clearly valued what he brought to a set, casting him again in Young Frankenstein the same year as the blind man who guides the monster toward the wrong bridge. His personal life left very little in the way of widely documented public record across the span of his working years. Liam Dunn passed away on April 5, 1976, at around 59 years old, barely 2 years after the film that represents his most lasting screen legacy. Number 13, we have Charles McGregor as Charlie, the gang member whose scenes in the film contributed to an ensemble of villains so comprehensively incompetent that their collective failure felt not just inevitable but richly deserved. Around 47 during production, he came to Blazing Saddles, carrying his most recognized previous credit from the blaxploitation classic Superfly 2 years earlier, where his supporting presence had given that film a texture it needed in its peripheral characters to feel fully inhabited. The range between a 1972 crime film shot on the streets of Harlem and a 1974 Mel Brooks Western filmed on a backlot in California reflects the particular versatility that character actors of generation developed out of necessity rather than by design, moving between whatever the industry offered with the professional flexibility that sustained careers across unpredictable decades. His personal life remained largely outside the public record throughout his working years. Charles McGregor passed away on March 1, 1995, leaving behind a filmography that deserves more attention than it has typically received in the decades since. Number 14, we have George Firth as Van Johnson, another of Rock Ridge's perpetually outraged citizens, whose presence in the Johnson ensemble gave the townspeople scenes an additional layer of comic density and whose contribution to American entertainment extended well beyond anything he ever did in front of a camera. Around 41 during production, the work that earned him his most significant professional recognition happened almost entirely on the other side of the theatrical experience. As a playwright and librettist whose collaborations with composer Stephen Sondheim produced Company in 1970 and Merrily We Roll Along in 1981, two productions that secured his place in Broadway history independent of anything his acting career had managed to accomplish. He never married and maintained his personal life almost entirely outside the public conversation. Across the full span of his dual career in writing and performing, George Firth passed away on August 11, 2008, at 75 years old, leaving behind a theatrical legacy that continues to be performed on stages across the world, decades after he wrote it. Number 15, we have Jack Starrett as Gabby Johnson, the incomprehensible town elder whose speech nobody in Rockridge can actually understand, but whose passionate delivery convinces everyone around him that whatever he just said was almost certainly important. Born Claude Ennis Starrett Jr., he was around 37 during production and operated simultaneously on both sides of the camera throughout his career, directing action films and biker movies across the same series. He was picking up acting work in productions like this one. The dual career reflected a filmmaker's sensibility about how scenes should be built, combined with a performer's instinct for finding the specific human quality that makes a comic moment land rather than simply exist. His directing credits included Run, Angel, Run, and Cleopatra Jones, genre films that found their audiences through drive-in circuits and regional distribution during the same era. Blazing Saddles was breaking box office records through conventional theatrical release. His personal life stayed outside the public record throughout his working years. Jack Starrett passed away on March 27, 1989, at 52 years old. Number 16, we have Robin Hilton as Miss Stein, the governor's spectacularly capable and spectacularly underutilized secretary, whose scenes with Mel Brooks confirmed that the most dangerous person in any room is often the one nobody in authority is actually paying attention to. Around 29 during production, she is 81 today, one of the older surviving members of a cast that has lost many of its most recognizable faces across the decades since the film came out. She came to the role from a modeling background that gave her an ease in front of the camera that the part required without demanding anything more complicated than perfect comic timing and the ability to share a frame with Mel Brooks without disappearing into his considerable on-screen gravity. She appeared in additional films through the 1970s before gradually stepping back from the industry, a transition that has left her personal life and subsequent decades almost entirely outside the public record. What remains is a single scene in one of the most talked about American comedies ever made, and 52 years of audiences discovering it for the first time and finding it just as funny as the generation before them did.